Next up, Finance Report, Part 2. Mr. Rare. Are you going to take it first?
Yes, just
okay.
First meeting transitioning in.
All right.
So I will take the majority of this one.
All right.
And yes, thank y'all for that feedback and appreciate we'll get on a good cadence about breaks and where those best fall for questions and appreciate that so much. So, okay, is my presentation come? There we go. All right, so first, in tonight's discussion regarding budget and compensation, we're going to basically cover this in just a few parts. I'm going to start first with budget context and then go from there into some fiscal year 24 update. Mr. Rare will take some of that, and then fund balance review as well, and then talk about next steps related to fiscal year 24 and then beginning to plan for fiscal year 25. So I thought it was important with the budget context, just a quick reminder, we deal with this all the time, but again, just for anyone watching this evening or coming back to watch this presentation, our tax rate is at $1.13, thanks to our community that supported the Vader, and we continue to say thank you for that every opportunity we get, and we'll especially talk more about that this evening. But of course, we also know that the INS side of our funds, we're thankful to our voters for the bond funds that they approve, and those funds cannot be used for daily operation expenses. So people see one tax rate, but it functions in two different ways and cannot be used back and forth. I think it's important as people are hearing so much right now about how much money was put into public education, it's important for people to remember, and we are thankful for the property tax compression. We've said that every single time we've presented, but that is not new money to schools. That does not address inflation, the money that was put to buy down property taxes. It helps hold us harmless, but that $18 billion was not new money and does not address inflationary costs for school district. Additionally, we hear that education spending has kept up with inflation. Again, this is not accurate. The only way that the legislature could address inflation is through the basic allotment, and it would take an increase of about $1,000 per student for them to do that. So I'm going to use this as an example. TEA just recently released their report and in their annual report, and so they had this graphic about the 21-22 funding per student, and there in that graphic they're saying that there's about $14,928 on average per student. And so I'm just going to take a little bit of red to highlight the ways that I believe that this is an inaccurate representation of funding per student in the state of Texas. First of all, you'll notice in that green section that on average is about $10,000 per student. So how do they get to that green section? Well, first of all, you see the darker green, that's the basic allotment. That's the $6,160 per kid. That's the one thing on that circle graph that actually all districts have equitable access to. It is the only thing on that circle graph that all districts have equitable access to. So that is what has not been increased since 2019, and that would be where the funding for staff raises would come from. And so because the basic allotment was not increased, we've talked every single time, as you all are talking about possible compensation, that the legislature did not address raises for teachers or any staff out of any of the special sessions or the general session. Now, when you move up into the other colors of green, notice that inside that 10,000, they're counting those Tier 2 enrichment pennies. Again, we have said multiple times we're thankful for the $1.2 billion that was invested in the golden pennies, but that is not available to all school districts. So to say that that is feeding into the state average per pupil is not an accurate representation. And then the TRS on behalf, we are simply a pass-through for TRS on behalf. That does not address operational cost per student. I do not believe that should be counted in that $10,000. I think if that's going to be reported, my recommendation would be that they pull that out on a separate graph. And then the other two amounts that I believe should be reported separately that are inflating this representation would be in orange, that's your INS funds across the state. So that's $1,600 roughly that they're totaling up in that $14,928. But we all know INS funds, not IRS funds. INS funds are only approved by voters in local communities, and that's not true for all school districts at this time. And then ESSER funds are also part of that $14,000, and we all know those ESSER funds are not contributing. They're not continuing. So if we want to include ESSER, we just need to pull it off of that dollar total and report it out separately. It's very simple. And then the other two things that also they're reporting on as part of that $14,000, I'm just going to highlight school safety and special education. We know that special education is underfunded in our state, both federal and state dollars. And then school safety, for a state our size, we're appreciative of the $286 million that the legislature increased, but we know school safety was already underfunded. And so that is definitely needing a larger increase. So with all of that said, I would say to you tonight, the average funding is not $14,928 per student, and I recommend that they come up with a different graphic to tell a more accurate story. And then that feeds into, as we talked about, without the basic allotment increasing, we talked about this last month as well, there's no money for staff raises. You all have approved raises to staff. We did not believe that we would be in the place of no increase to the basic allotment, but that is where we are, unfortunately, at this time. So here's a couple of examples of those state unfunded mandates as we've really been looking at the cost of all of our programs in the school district. And so I just pulled on the slide pre-K and special education. And so if you look at the very bottom there, our average cost for core content K through 5 is about $3,600 per student. So you can see our cost per student for our students who are at Lily Jackson is about $12,496. And then for our pre-K students at other campuses, about $7,869. Those differences are attributed to you're repeating a nurse and assistant principals and some staff at Lily Jackson that when you have pre-K on other campuses, those positions serve everybody. And you just take a look at what we're running short. We are actually running a deficit for pre-K of $3.7 million. The state gives you an early ed allotment that's about $5 million, but we know that was supposed to cover a variety of things, not just full-day pre-K. So that's an unfunded mandate. A good example there of how that $10,000 in that green bar we just looked at is well short of that $12,000 for our Lily Jackson students. And then for special education, we have our various programs there. You see that our teams program is running us about $27,000 per student. Our big classrooms are running about $14,000 per student. We spend $63 million on special education. We're running about $10 to $15 million short than what we receive funding for. So those are just a couple of examples of where some unfunded mandates and programming needs to be addressed. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott to talk a little bit about tax rate and the fiscal year 24.
All right, so this slide takes a look at the district's tax rate history for the maintenance and operation tax rate. Going back to prior to the 86 legislative session when tax rate compression began. And so you'll see that the slide includes both the district's maximum compressed tax rate, which is the MCR rate, and any golden and copper pennies that the district has. So there has been tax compression going back to the 2019-20 fiscal year. And you'll see as property values have increased significantly over the last few years and with some legislation, there's been some pretty significant decreases in the district's MCR rate. You'll also see in the current year, in fiscal year 24, an increase of 3 golden pennies and 5 copper pennies as a result of the VADR. And so as the tax rate will continue to compress. We're projecting right now very minimal compression for the next few years. But even with that compression, we will get to keep the golden and copper pennies that the community has awarded us through the VADR. And then starting just to take a look at the budget assumptions that were used to project our revenue for this current year. The district's budget was based on projected enrollment of 48,956 students. Our snapshot, we were slightly higher than that at 49,060 students. But what's most important is the estimated ADA, because that's how we're funded by the state. And so our budget was based on 45,530 ADA, and at the end of the third 6 weeks, that's exactly where we were, which was amazing to be that close. And so, we'll continue to track that throughout the year just to see how that matches up with what our revenue assumptions were. Looking at property values, our T2 value that was used when adopting the budget was $55.2 billion, and we're down right now to about 54.1. And so the lower value is through the comptroller's property value study, and that lower value will actually decrease the district's local share. And so decreasing that local share is going to help reduce our recapture payment. And then taking a look at our tax rate, the M&O tax rate, just under 75 cents, and we use 99% collections, and the INS rate of just over 38 cents, and also using 99% collections. So looking at our adopted revenue that was projected for this year, we were projecting $558.3 million. And you can see the breakdown of those. The majority was in our local revenue, which was 80%, state revenue 17%, and federal revenue of 3%. And I will mention, and you'll see this on the next slide, but those percentages will change after the bills were finalized that increased the homestead exemption and thus shifted more funding from local to state. What was talked about earlier, though, it didn't increase funding for school districts. It just shifted the burden or the percentage from local to state. And so now taking a look at what our most recent projections are for revenue through January, we're looking at $547 million. And so that is a reduction from what was included in the initial budget. And so the main differences are on the federal side, there's a reduction in our SHARS Medicaid reimbursement. And then on the local and the state side, our levy went down, our property tax or value levy went down. And so our T2 values did not go down at the same rate. And so that's why we are currently protesting that our T2 values should actually be lower and more in line with our property values. And so if that appeal is successful, then that's where the district could see some additional state funding. And so taking a look at what our revenue would be for this current year if we used the small increase of $350 to the basic allotment, we'd be looking at $568.8 million, which would generate an additional $21 million more than what we're looking at right now. So on the expenditure side, some of the assumptions that were used, the budget included recapture payment of $12.5 million. At the end of the third 6 weeks, we're currently projecting $11.5 million as a result of lower property values. And then on payroll, the budget was $445.5 million. We're tracking slightly below that through the third 6 weeks. So we budget based on a fill rate of 98%. At the end of the third 6 weeks, we were at 96.5%. So we're looking at about $2.2 million of savings right now for payroll. And then on the non-payroll side, we budgeted $115.3 million, and that's at 100%. At the end of January, we're currently projecting $110 million, so about 95% of our expenditures. So that would be non-payroll savings of about $5.3 million.
All right, and then you all had a question at the January board meeting, and so I appreciate Melissa and Tim getting an answer to this about how did the retention rate with our stipends approve, how did that look? And so you can see there's the stipends you approved and what our retention rate of those categories of staff were. And I want to say thank you to Amber for all of her work on all the expenditures, assumptions, revenue. I know it's been numbers everywhere since January. We've been meeting about all that, and I really appreciate running all of that information. This was just a reminder for you from last month about what it would cost to give. Even a 1% raise would cost us $4 million for all employees, $2.7 million for teachers. We're just repeating that information for you to have. And then the recap too, of course, we shared this slide last month. Just a reminder that over the last 4 years, y'all have spent $58.5 million on raises. And when you add in those healthcare contributions, you've spent $71.7 million on healthcare contributions for staff too. So we appreciate the commitment to our staff and wish that the legislature would have supported you all on the decisions that you've made. And that's where we get to the deficit that we have that you saw there right now, about a $17.6 million deficit. So here's just a little bit different look at what we've talked about this evening. Without the Vader, we would have been at $48 million. Again, thanks to our community, we estimated around a $12.5 million deficit. We've had a little bit lower T2 value along with the SHARS reimbursement, so we're sitting at about 17.6. But if there had been even a $350 increase to the basic allotment, you would have pretty much a balanced budget. So let's take a look at the possible impact to fund balance, and we'll talk about next steps.
All right, so Board Policy CE Local sets a fund balance target of 25% of operating expenditures. So you'll see on this slide the last few years what our actual expenditures were for the general fund, what 25% of those expenditures would be, so what our target fund balance would be, and then where the district ended up at the end of the year for fund balance. And so for fiscal year 21, you'll see that our fund balance was much higher than at the targeted goal. Then it came down a little bit in fiscal year 22, but still outpaced the targeted goal. Just slightly ahead of the targeted goal in fiscal year 23. But then our projected expenditures for this current fiscal year are $564.7 million, which would be a targeted fund balance goal of $138.2 million. And right now we're projecting our fund balance to come in just under $115 million. So we would be underneath the goal that the board has set. And so as we're taking a look at fund balance and just the different considerations as to why you want to make sure you maintain that healthy fund balance, a few of the ones that we've discussed are fund balance is reviewed as part of our first rating that TEA looks at every year. And so TEA recommends 90 days in our fund balance. Our rating could be impacted when districts fall below that amount. So if we were to fall to 75 days of operating expenditures or less, the maximum score we could receive is a B, and then it goes down from there. So if you get down to about 60 days of operating expenditures, then you're down into a C range. So there's a negative impact on the first rating. And then the next one would be fund balance is reviewed every time we have bond rating calls for either bond sales, refundings, defeasance. And so we need to make sure that we maintain a healthy fund balance there because it could impact our credit rating and thus the interest that we're paying on bonds. And then the last one would be cash flow considerations. We need to make sure that we have enough funding in fund balance to make our payments to vendors and to staff up until and through the time when we start receiving the majority of our payments, which are later in the fall. And then in August of 2023, the board adopted an updated CE local policy that states that in the event the unassigned fund balance amount falls below the 25% targeted level, the board shall within 36 months adopt a plan to restore this balance to the target level. And if restoration of the reserve cannot be accomplished within this period without severe hardship to the district, the board shall establish a different time period.
So we have taken numerous steps over time to address deficits and find operational savings. And you all have seen this ahead of tonight, so I'm not going to go over all of those point by point. But just to say, even as much as last year, we made a 15% reduction to non-payroll budgets in central office. And we will be reviewing central office budgets as we look to close that gap, as y'all saw with the expenditure projection at 95%, to do everything we can in order to not dip back into fund balance for this year. We review all central office vacancies, and we work very hard to maintain a very low percentage of our budget on administration. We, over time, required a long time ago that our athletic coaches have certification beyond PE in order to maximize their teaching capacity. And we're going on having that for more than 10 years. We built that staffing analyzer. We look to have energy efficiency, and we look to maximize other sources of revenue. Even tonight, we heard the property tax update, for instance. But for the 199 side, you've got rental of facilities and interest income and advertising on buses and all of those things. And of course, we have maintained open enrollment. We're going to hear more about that in the student services presentation. It's a good night to hear about how we are open enrollment to try to maintain in the face of a stabilizing enrollment. So we have, as a district, been taking care to do some right sizing as our enrollment has stabilized and somewhat declined, and we see larger classes of seniors graduating than we see incoming kinders. So with all of this said, what we know for next year already is we will continue to have stable or slightly declining enrollment as those large classes of seniors graduate. As you heard from Scott, there's going to be very little M&O tax compression. That's going to look very similar. We will get a little bit more of a bump with the increase to the golden penny yield. That could be about $1.4 million. And right now, there's really no indication at this time that the legislature is coming back into session to address the basic allotment. So the bottom line is our budget situation from this year is what we will be facing next year, and we know we cannot continue to go into fund balance. So as a result of needing to make some tough financial decisions, we've drafted guiding principles that you all have been giving us feedback about. And so the version of these that I have tonight incorporates all of the feedback that we've received from all of you. They're organized by our 4 cornerstones. Student learning would be first as we look at making financial decisions. We want to protect the quality of the learning environment and instruction of our students. Safety and security of all of our students and staff is absolutely one of our largest priorities as well. In our student experience cornerstone, as we make financial decisions, we want to minimize the negative impact to our students, and we want to be intentional in the opportunities and pathways for students to be successful. When it comes to community engagement, we want to maximize those local tax dollars that were approved in the VADER in the absence of state funding from our legislature. We will continue, of course, as a strong team of 8 to advocate to our legislature to fulfill their constitutional duty of funding public schools as a partner to their local community funding, and really continue to emphasize that we are the largest employer in Denton County and we have a significant economic impact to our county, and we need our public schools to be funded. And then we want to protect and preserve the intellectual capital and expertise that has built our systems in Lewisville ISD to be the exceptional provider of education in our community. And then our resource stewardship cornerstone, we will continue to increase the efficiency of our course offerings and electives. As our overall student enrollment is stabilizing, we have to be sure that we're maximizing the course offerings that our kids are choosing from and ensuring that we're getting the maximum amount of participation in those as possible. We'll look at right-sizing our facilities to our enrollment and creating levels of efficiency for our buildings. We want to maintain those current levels of compensation for staff, that $58.5 million that you all have invested. And should the legislature come back and increase the basic allotment, of course, the very first place that all of that goes would be in compensation for staff as well. And we want to do our best to make any reductions through attrition as certification allows. So our next steps would be identifying ways to address the deficit and maintain that minimum fund balance expenditure, continue to report back to you all on fiscal year 24 spending and our position fill rate, continue to monitor those T2 values that are currently under protest, reclassify our capital-like expenditures with land sale proceeds, and then, if necessary, put together that 3-year plan depending on the fiscal year 24 ending. And with all of that context, Madam President, I'll to you all.
Thank you. I will start with Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Madam President. The first, I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but with the annual report that TEA put out, the issue is that the public is getting this information, that we're being well funded and we're not. So I feel like we have a duty to counter that message with the correct information. I don't know how we do that, but the public has to understand that we are not getting, what was it, $14,000 a student. With respect to special ed services, I know we had talked about how that's severely underfunded. What are our trends for the students needing special ed services? Are we trending upward with that?
Yes, we continue to trend upward in that percentage. And so that's one of the reasons why we really advocated that the legislature would consider increasing the special ed funding weights in order to address, because that's a trend not just specific to Lewisville ISD. That really is a trend I think the majority of districts across the state are seeing.
So the end result is that number gets bigger, the deficit related to that area. My next question for Scott, the 99% collections on tax rate, is that reasonable? Is that something that we've used every year? How to actual is it?
Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure if that's what we've always used, but that is a reasonable rate.
Okay.
Typically, I mean, you'll be 99. You could be even upwards to 100,
Oh, okay.
depending on how the levy is adjusted throughout the year.
Okay. And I was trying to take notes about our adopted revenue versus, I don't know to call it actual, where we were, and it seemed like the deficit was bigger. Am I understanding that correctly, or is it still the 17.5?
No, it'd still be that amount.
Okay, the 17.5. Got it.
But it is
And then-
bigger than what we originally estimated at 12 million.
Okay. And then my other note is not even really a question, more of a point that dipping into your fund balance, we talked about it before, it's like having a savings account, just like if you have, your budget at home and you have some options, increase revenue. We don't sell anything and outside the basic allotment, there are some things we can do, but probably not to get that number up where it needs to be. So the other thing is to cut expenses, because if you don't do that, right, you're dipping into your savings account or the fund balance. And I did a quick, and dirty on the napkin calculation. If we go at the rate that we're going now, if we keep spending money in a deficit at the rate that we're spending it now, conservatively, this district has 5 to 6 years. After that, the district is bankrupt. There is no more money. And I want to put that out there so people understand this is a dire situation. I don't mean to bring anybody down, but this is a dire situation. So we have to do whatever we need to do as good stewards of this district to eliminate the deficit as much as possible and operate as closely as we can to what's coming in is what is going out. I know everybody knows that already, but I just wanted to point that out. Adding it up and looking at how long we have operating at this rate really brought it home for me. So hopefully that's doing the same for us as well, and we can come together as a team and figure out how to get this done. Of course, we want to be funded by the legislature. I don't know, is that ever going to happen? We have to operate that it might not happen, worst case scenario. So again, these are some things, some decisions that we have to make. That's all I have.
Dr. Barker?
Just to piggyback on what my colleague is saying, there are things that we would want to do and there are things that we have to do, right? I think every single one of us would love to be able to sit around this table and say confidently what we could do if we had the financial capacity to do so, whether that has to do with compensation or additional benefits or a whole list of things that Dr. Rapp and her team has presented to us in the past of what we would do if we could, but we can't. And the legislature has put us in a really untenable situation, and we are having to respond within that situation with what we can do. And it's unfortunate, but we have this problem, and we are doing our best, and we can see it. There's a whole list in tiny, tiny little font of all the things that we are doing to provide solutions to this problem. Now, I will say that I think that we're in a better position than some of our other districts, because some of these things, as you mentioned, Dr. Rapp, we've been doing for years. to make sure that we are in a better position. But there's still work to be done. And I keep having to go back to that because I'm, I have the heart of the teacher that's in the classroom that's looking at their grocery bill going up. I get it. There are things that we would want to do, and there are things that we have to do.
Thank you. Dr. Bronner?
I wrote a bunch of notes down here. Maybe I'll start with the positive. Metroplex-wide, statewide, everybody's in the same position. Some districts have a larger fund balance, and so they can live a little longer, maybe give 2% this year to teacher and educator pay raises instead of 1% or 0%. And the positive of that is Lewisville ISD's worked really hard to get salaries up into the 25th percentile. So I guess we can maintain that because no one's going to be given big raises. So there's your positive for tonight. We've talked before about being in partnership with state on school funding, right? We provide a portion, I think it was 75%, 78%, and they provide the remainder. There's your partnership. The partnership in the last legislature through 4 special sessions worked to strangle public education, traditional public education's funding, period, end of story. Money was approved for usage, but did not get dispersed because educational savings accounts did not pass muster. The 4 legislators that are in the House in this area all voted in favor of educational savings accounts. 3 of the 4 voted in a matter that got them a primary challenger. Hadn't did anything to do with school funding. Where I'm going with that is pay attention to what's going on locally, because that's the only place we're going to be able to impact for the next cycle. We are where we're going to be next year. There's not going to be any more funding coming along, I don't believe. So pay attention to that. One of them did a podcast, a WFAA podcast called Y'all-itics. I don't know if you've heard of that or not, but it was a good podcast. The gentleman does not have an opponent, so man, he's unencumbered in what he says, and he just let loose. I suggest you listen to that. But he took a total whiff on school funding. He said, also, if you're explaining in politics, you're losing. Well, he made sure and didn't explain, because what he said was that the legislature funded schools adequately this year. That's incorrect. You saw that up there. They did not provide new funding. They provided level funding. They did not give any new money. And that's where we get into the deficit coming in, because there's no accommodation for inflation. So what do? Well, I kind of like these slides, several of them, to send to those legislators so they can correct their error on what was funded and what was not funded. I've got just a couple more things I want to say, and then I'll quit yammering. Early voting for all those primary elections is coming up at the end of February, and I think it goes through March 4th. Something like that. So I would encourage anybody listening to go vote, find out who's voting which way, and encourage them to support their public schools, because this district has $17 million that we're going to have to carve out somewhere. And there is a committee pulled together to figure that out. It's Ms. Prosnick and Ms. Taylor and I on what we can reduce to move forward. And, just looking at the 2 examples, I guess it's pre-K and special ed, right? Because those are big cost overruns. That's what a business would do. A business would carve out anything, and you all know this, would carve out anything they can't afford. Well, I guess it's that. Is that what we're going to do? Yeah. So this is in jest. If you have a special education student or a pre-K student, please don't think we're getting rid of that. But that's where we are, is what programs are we going to cut? So it is a dire situation. And, Tracy Miller said several years ago that, well, gosh, we can't continue to operate this district 7, 8, 10 years out. And he was right. And you're right, too, Ms. Taylor. Thank you.
Ms. Lasan? You get to follow that.
Well, I think that you guys have pretty much kind of said it all, and I mean, I'm not sure what else there is to say. I mean, a little bit speechless, but not really, you know. Yeah, we're in a very dire situation, and I'm not sure what we can do. Dr. Rapp, I know that you are working hard to cut as much as you can, and in central office, and do what you can. And Mr. Ware, sorry you're coming in. I guess you went from one district that's experiencing this to another, but still, anyway, thanks for your efforts. And, you know, we're here to support you guys and do what we can. You know, if that's advocate, certainly we'll do that for sure. And anyway.
Ms. Alcatab?
I kind of look at it at the doom and the gloom, right? We've been put into a situation that is unfortunate. And Dr. Bonner said, the good thing is we're facing the same thing like everybody else is. The bad thing is we're facing it. And the slide where you showed the breakdown of what they think that we're getting per student is absurd. And what saddens me is that's what the perception is out there, that we are receiving $14,928 per student to educate them. That is incorrect. Dr. Rapp did a great breakdown of showing where we actually lie with that. And I think, Ms. Taylor said, we really have to make sure that we're educating the community so that they understand. Because we are in a situation right now where we're having to think of other alternatives, which is so unfortunate. And, we have to make sure that we're doing what's right to fix this deficit. Each of us as board members took that oath. We took that responsibility that we will do whatever we can to advocate for this district, to advocate for our students and our teachers. And so we're being put into a situation because, like Dr. Bonner, I don't think any more funding is coming this year. And what we're seeing is going to continue for next year. And so we're really going to have to think hard of what we're going to do to move forward. And talking to those legislators, they've got to back us. They've got to come out. They created this doom and gloom, and now we're having to pick up the pieces.
Ms. Sells?
I think I'm tired after 8 years. We've spent 4 of those 8 years putting our prettiest dress on, going down to Austin, and twirling. Twirling so that they would pay attention to what we were saying was true. And the minute they closed the door behind us, I think they thought that they saw Cinderella before the change to a beauty, because they see us as dirty. They don't see our value. They would rather us be sweeping than to acknowledge what we do in this district. And what we do in this district is remarkable. For 8 years, we've done more with less every year. We continue to do more every year. Look at our students. Go into our classrooms. Come to an awards ceremony. Come to the SB Awards. Come to the LEF. Where are they? They're not there. And yet, I will commit to putting on that pretty dress again. If they call session, or even if they don't. And we will all go down and we will twirl again. Because I have the hope that one of these days, that there will be people in Austin that will see our pretty dress and will see our value in public education. And beyond that, I am just sad and tired. And that's all I want to say.
Well, definitely going to echo some of the things my colleagues said, but I don't want to get in a doom loop because I think what we offer, to what Ms. Sells says, is amazing in this district. I think we offer a culture that other districts envy. I think that we have amazing teachers, we have amazing students, and we have a community that supported us in passing of the Vader. We partnered with our community in passing the Vader. And to Dr. Bonner's thing, we're supposed to be partnering with the legislature. I believe if you look at slide 26, which shows everything that we've done far before this year, shows that we have come to that relationship with good faith. We have come willing to partner. The legislature has not partnered with us. They have partnered with the governor, not their constituents. And I would ask you to ask those who are running in primaries how they intend to partner with their ISDs. I've said this many times. 95% of students in the state of Texas are educated in public schools. What kind of future do you want if you're not going to invest in them? And $350 more per student doesn't cut it. The sad part is that money has been allocated and it is just sitting in an account. And it is not benefiting the students in this state that deserve it, that would benefit from it. Ms. Sells is tired, and I'm tired and mad. So, with that,
I'll close it up.
I'll let you close
okay.
before I have to do the next.
All right. So definitely, board, I believe there is not a stronger board in the state of Texas in advocating for public schools. And every time I can, I call you all champions for public education. And all of your remarks this evening show that and put an exclamation point to that statement. While we have been put in a situation where we're going to have to identify ways to address the deficit, we definitely have the ability to do that by pulling together and uniting together as Lewisville ISD. That's what we always do. That's what we will continue to do. And we'll assure everybody that we're not walking out of here this evening, that these are the 10 things that are absolutely being changed from this point forward. But what we commit to people is that we will be very thoughtful. We will stick to those guiding principles that you all drafted that are so strong. And we will keep everybody informed about every step that we have to take in order to address this $17 million. And thank you to our community that it's not $48 million. I'm honored to serve alongside you all and thankful for your voices in this conversation.